Praxis Oral, so we're the professional association for tech transfer and knowledge exchange. We're partnered directly with the ESRC. So this is a sort of direct working together to create a community around commercialization generally, but specifically for social venture building within commercialization. There's a need to help arts, humanities and social science academics feel that this is a worthwhile and useful endeavour that meets their values and is not a barrier, but then also for any discipline across universities, there's an increase in the want to create impact that sustains itself and hits a larger scale. So this is not discipline specific, this is for anybody interested in how to develop more social impact focused commercial activity out of research. So we'll be doing that in 3 ways. One is creating this network, so the more and more people join and creating different sort of communication in different ways, then that's fantastic. We'll be sharing best practice and creating collaborative sort of platforms. But it's really important to make sure we get a wide range of institution types and sizes, and again, across all disciplines. So different ways that will connect you directly and more widely on these platforms is a really, really important part as this changes. The changes are coming slightly from the top down. The funding system in university is going to continue to change, and the focus on impact is going to continue to be promoted. But coming from a background in social enterprises myself, I believe very strongly that that is a good thing for academics. And as long as the policies and the structures and the processes are correct and reflect what we can actively sort of realistically do and make sure everyone's happy, then we can see some real impact from research that sustains itself and sort of redefines what universities are. They're a part of creating that change with expertise coming from the disciplines. The second aim is to co-design those professional standards. As I said, we're a professional association. We create training and advocate for policy and things like that. So some of it will feed into what we offer as an organisation, but then also more widely what we want to see in collaborative platforms for commercial activity, linking with outside organisations or sort of sector specific best practice. We need to sort of formalise that and understand what it is that would make it recognised and a sustainable act within itself, and not just something else that we now have to sort of get academics to do. So really interactively and practically designing those policies, personal development and platforms is what we're all here to do together. And then that goes to a third aim, which is to advocate for that. So as I said, some of that we can deliver directly as Praxis Oral, some of that will feed back directly to the research councils we're in partnership with. And there's also a wider advocacy role here to make sure that on a regional level or through different themes within research, and then on a national government level, that we're saying, hey, these are some really great things that we can be doing. We can be creating impact at scale and creating this real sort of socially focused outputs from research. But this is the support we have to see. This is the wording and funding. This is how the sort of measures of success and the larger policy changes need to go in order to make sure that that's doable. So again, it's about bringing us all together, making sure more voices are a part of this conversation, and then co-designing what we need to see as a sector to be able to do this work properly, and then shouting about it both across the UK and internationally. There's a couple of other things just to shout out about community before we move on to the session itself, which is about social enterprises and social venture building, which one is sort of the governance of this community. As I said, as we move on, the sessions and the activities around them will become more and more sort of interactive, but the community is horizontal and it's a member-led thing. It's completely free and open to anyone that's interested and relevant to this conversation. But taking some leadership maybe in a regional area or around different themes and things like that is something that hopefully will develop organically through these conversations, and we can start to say what are the specific connections and relationships we need to build that work, but then also what are the sort of platforms and collaborative work that's going to happen in different places to make sure that it continues. Another thing there is we did try the Praxis Oral Forum to have some communication ahead of these workshops. I feel maybe sometimes people just read things and don't get too sort of vocal on there, which is absolutely fine. I will continue to share some content on there. But what we're going to create is a LinkedIn group for this community, which just feels a bit more of an accessible and open way for people to get updates and communicate back and forth, maybe comment on things and look at bigger content and react to it. So if there's anybody who has ideas for sort of guest content or wants to spotlight something they're doing or promote what they're doing, then that's absolutely what this community is for. So just get in touch through email, and we'll find a way to make sure that's spotlighted on that group as it develops. And then also branch out events in November. So this series of workshops will end in about 4 weeks' time. And this will sort of kick off the community and have you all speaking to each other and aware of who's around and the different sort of strands of work or focus that we're going to be co-designing policy and professional development around. But then there's space for more sort of dedicated sessions in November. So I'll have more sort of special guests, and it's faced more on networking at that point. So again, I have ideas of what those themes are going to be and what sort of is needed in this area, but it's a completely horizontal community. So the more people say what they want and want to help define those, then that's absolutely fantastic, and we'll start to create those over these sessions to happen again in November. Again, it's all going to be free, open, online. It's a completely accessible community, and it has to be sort of designed by you. The more you get involved, the more useful the information is we create, and the better I can then advocate for it and make sure that that support comes down the line. So moving on to this session then, thanks very much to our speakers. We've got a great range of people here to talk about the different stages of social enterprise development. Social enterprise, as I said at the start, is a great way to engage arts, management, social science academics, because a lot of them feel that that's where the impact from their research should go, and it sort of stops the issue of thinking that it's purely money focused. But again, it's for all disciplines, absolutely. There's impacts of focus for absolutely everybody. So understanding this sector is really, really important. I have a background in social enterprises, so can see some really fantastic links that can be made so that it's not down to each individual professional to work out what to do with that project and who to speak to. And it's a great balance of making sure the sort of nuts and bolts needs of universities is met, that things are sustaining themselves and able to grow and get support for themselves and start to scale up, but having as a principle built into the fundamentals sort of process of that development is looking at global challenges, social impact, and whatever theme your research is in, making sure that's doing sort of good or something outside of conventional limited company kind of investment and growth for capital return, which, as I said, is an important part, it's part of the process, but this is the nice sort of balance. Just on that, there's a couple forms that won't really get covered in this session. One is charities, because I personally don't think it's the sort of best way to engage academics. It's a very onerous system. It makes some sort of difficulties with public money, which might be in a source of income for your social ventures. And also a lot of these forms of social venture can become charities later on, if that is what the academic feels is right, but it's maybe not the best way to get going. If people want to know more about charities, I will share content through the community about that. But we're looking at ways to really get projects going and what is the appropriate sort of platforms we need here in this community, so charities aren't going to get covered too much. And then almost on the other end of the scale, going through sort of trading businesses and social enterprises that do trade but meet social impact values. The far end is then sort of accreditation for social value. So that would be limited companies generally that then go to these organizations to get some kind of check mark that they are doing good. Good examples of those are B Corp and the UN SDGs, which is a set of networks and goals that you can get sort of a big tick on if you're meeting certain challenges. We will have dedicated sessions on those, but it's worth noting that a session in the new year in January is going to be specifically on metrics and how do we translate success in this area to meet existing metrics of success in the university system. And those are going to be really, really useful for that session, because we're going to be talking about how you say, yes, this did what it was meant to do because this many people were affected in this way, and that's exactly the impact we want, as opposed to pure sort of commercial measures. But again, I've got some great content about those, so those will be shared through the community as well. So to move on to our speakers then, thanks again, really, really great contributions here. We're going to start with Nicola Malloy from Social Enterprise UK, who can give us a sort of 101 of what is a social enterprise and a sort of just first prompt of what that sector looks like, what are the values, and who's sort of involved, which is a great introduction. Then we'll move on to Marina Pritchard at Alia, which is a really great example of social enterprise development, so specific mentoring, training development, training programs, and organizational development that you'll need at different stages. They've got some great examples and a great rundown of what that looks like. How we then translate that into infrastructure in our universities is a really key aspect here, and that is, some of the development we're trying to co-design. And then we'll move on to Jeremy Pannell from Triodos Bank, which is and it does provide investment and development, things like that, for more developed organisations, but will give us a great insight into one of the larger sort of bits of support and funding that exist once you're sort of thriving a bit more in the social enterprise sector. So feel free to chat away in the sort of chat panel. There'll be space for questions throughout. We'll have a dedicated Q&A once all the speakers have done their bit. But yeah, any really great ones or pertinent questions that come up, I will ask speakers directly after each session. And then we'll come together afterwards to sort of react and develop from that. So if everyone's happy, Nicola, are you okay to carry on now and give your few minutes?
Thank you, Arnie. And hi, everybody. It's great to be with you all today. So my name's Nicola, and I'm a Senior Partnership Manager at Social Enterprise UK. We're the national representative body for the social enterprise sector. Just briefly on our work, we are the largest network of social enterprises in the UK. We have about 3,500 members, and that's always growing. Some of the areas of work we also do is in research. So we have the largest repository of data on social enterprise in the UK. We have a great understanding of where the sector is today, the challenges it faces, the support that it needs. And a lot of that information is used then to influence structural change across the UK. So things like policy influence change and for example, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the Social Value Act. That's something that we co-authored in 2012, and we support the ongoing evolution of the Act. That's very much around how companies engage with government and how social enterprise can factor into that. We have our general election campaign we've just launched to influence the new government that will come in next year in policy around social enterprise, and we do things like market building opportunities for social enterprise to help grow the sector, essentially. But what I'm here today to do is to tell you all about social enterprise and what it is by definition, and give you some examples to bring it to life. I personally discovered the model back when I was at university, which feels like a long time ago now, when I was studying my undergraduate degree at the University of Portsmouth, and our head of department introduced us to social enterprise as an alternative form for international aid, because I was studying international development, and I fell in love with the model a long time ago and decided this is where I wanted my career to be, because I thought it was a really interesting use of different practices from entrepreneurship, but also looking to solve some of the world's most pressing problems, and it really resonated with me. So what it means in practice, it's a business first and foremost. The reason it exists, though, is to be a business that's a force for good. So obviously, by our definition, and I'm going to share links to our definitions in the chat as well afterwards, just to help. It's a business that trades. So we expect that the majority of the income is through trade, so that it has a sustainable form of running itself, but also that majority of the profits, so the surplus that's left after the cost of production of running the business, is reinvested into the mission that it was created to run, or to the problem to solve. This could be from a variety of different causes. Broadly speaking, it's both people and planet are the two super broad categories, but this could be from working with any type of disadvantaged community, or it could be protecting the environment, regenerative or restorative projects, so all different types of stuff, and it can be anywhere in the world as well. So there is a lot of social enterprise activity across the world. There is a real hotbed of activity in the UK specifically, but there's other countries like Australia and Sri Lanka and Nigeria and places like that where there's a lot of activity in this space as well. So just to give you some of that, I think it's easier to put it into practice by giving some real world examples. Most people know of the brand Patagonia, which is a very successful athleisure brand. They do a lot of like hiking gear and stuff like that. I've got a rucksack by them. And they actually just recently became a social enterprise. They've always been known to invest in purpose and use a lot of their income and their brand to advocate for sustainability and other causes. The reason why they're now a social enterprise and they weren't before is all about the ownership of the company. They transitioned the ownership from the family who had all the shares in the business to a charity which exists to solve the climate crisis, which is obviously a massive topic, but there's lots of projects that they fund. So this what distinguishes a traditional business from a social enterprise, is the use of the income, the shares, and how that could be repurposed to fund projects. So as long as Patagonia is a successful company, which it always has been, they will also then be able to fund projects that matter to the board and to the charity that own the business. Other ones you may have heard of are Who Gives a Crap, which is a great name for a toilet paper company, and they give 50% of their profits to water sanitation projects across the world to make sure that everybody in our lifetime has access to a safe toilet. Tony's Chocolonely, which gives majority of its profits to combating the slave trade in the chocolate industry. Also delicious chocolate you can find in Sainsbury's. So there's lots of great examples out there. And actually, in fact, there's 100,000 social enterprises in the UK alone, which is super significant part of the British economy, and very, well, we call it a hidden revolution because a lot of people don't know the model by its name. They've probably seen things like Who Gives a Crap in practice, but don't really realize that this is a movement, and it actually contributes to 60 billion of the UK GDP on an annual basis. So it's bigger than the British agricultural sector, the social enterprise sector itself. So it's got huge clout and huge potential as well to grow. And it's, as I mentioned before, it sits across a number of different industries. It's not just B2C like the examples that I gave, it's B2B as well. A lot of them are working in major construction supply chains, like you'll have window fitting companies to cleaning companies, waste management, like Recycling Lives, who hire, majority of their people are those that have been in prisons. They work with prison leavers before they leave and provide them with housing in some cases and well-being support and essentially jobs to help them re-enter the labour market. All different types of wonderful examples out there that will be local and local to you and national. Other stats to show why the sector is exciting, to wrap up, they're actually, through our research, proven to be the most innovative part of the private sector. So I say they're part of the private sector. They're not for profit. They're not outside of the private sector. They sit within it, but they're a different part of it. But we've seen that this segment of the private sector is the most innovative. So in our social enterprise, State of Social Enterprise report we produced a couple of years ago, we're going to be producing our next one in the next couple of months, or releasing it. We proved that 66% of social enterprises brought out a new product in the previous year, which was compared to 35% of businesses in the rest of the private sector. So not only are they solving some of the biggest challenges that we face in the UK and abroad, but they're also doing the most to think about the innovation that could be happening within the private sector. And that's what's really exciting about today, and looking at the role that research can play in informing that innovation and feeding into that. They're also the center and the forefront of job creation, and job creation for those with the biggest barriers to entering the labour market. So we also, in our Hidden Revolution report we produced a few years ago, we showed that on average, for every £100,000 turnover that a social enterprise had gotten, they created on average 3 jobs, which in comparison to the rest of the private sector was 0.66 jobs are created for every 100,000 turnover. So it can just shows that not only are they here to create jobs and should be the center of the levelling up commitment that the UK government has, but they're also proven to be providing jobs for those with the biggest barriers to entering the labour market, as I mentioned before. We've got lots of different reports with lots of great stats about the sector. I'm really excited to hear that this conversation is happening today, because it's great to bring more minds into the sector and more ideas. So I'll send some links so you can all read more, and I look forward to answering any questions you have later.
Great, thanks so much, Nicola. The scale of the sector is really important one, because we're trying to formalise this as a recognised sort of route for development and commercial activity out of research. So to see that it's such a big contributor to the economy is really, really important. I think just to bring it back to universities, Nicola, there's a couple ways, I guess, to translate this to what academics and the team supporting academics need to know, and that is one, the sort of expertise that academics hold, what sort of space is there in existing social enterprises to plug into that, and then if the academics are looking themselves to develop social enterprises or social ventures, what are the different sort of customers that might be on offer there, both from sort of individuals all the way up, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I don't know if I understand the first question, which might be me being a bit slow, but do you mean what existing research is that out there that could be continued, or what? Sorry, could you explain that one?
Yeah, there's a bit of a question here where people maybe aren't quite at a stage to build their own organisation yet, but consultancy or licensing out of their knowledge to existing organisations is a route to start developing commercial activity. Generally, that's for limited companies that trade in a normal way, but as the social enterprise sector's there, it's basically these organisations cover all different kinds of work and topics and activity types, so that expertise that academics might hold for that specific area of work is still very, very sort of valuable to social enterprises.
Absolutely. I feel really passionate about this myself, as somebody that once ran a social enterprise, and I did it supporting people with alopecia, which is the hair loss condition that I've had since I was young. I was always going to say like how long I've had it, but then I'm like, I'm giving too much away then for everybody. But I went into it with lived experience. So then I had a real understanding of the challenge that I faced, although I couldn't represent everybody in the world that has alopecia. But it has made me think, and since working at SUK for the past 4 years and coming across a lot of different types of social enterprises that cover a lot of different topics, there's a lot of people that come into it because they have lived experience with the challenge, and that is an advantage because you have a deeper understanding of it. But if you're interested in creating something to make an impact, you don't necessarily have lived experience with it. You're just personally passionate about putting your skills to best use to help people or to protect the planet. There's a big gap between what you then understand, and often it's the knowledge that's in front of you or the experience in front of you. Whereas actually there's so many amazing topics that are covered by researchers, particularly at universities, and students are lucky enough if they get to receive that knowledge by studying and frankly paying a lot of money to understand that topic through one particular area. But there's so much more knowledge that they don't get exposed to. And when you start thinking about bridging the gap between personal passion for solving a challenge and then actually building a solution that will make a change and that does matter, and really importantly doesn't already exist somewhere else, and you're not just replicating something great that other people have done or tried, that gap could be closed so much more if there was more information shared about what we understand of this challenge, what we understand about the solutions that do and don't work, and in what context. So there's a lot of people that would then be armed with the knowledge to think, okay, this is how I want to try and approach it, because this is a new approach that hasn't been done before. So I think not only is it people starting out on their social entrepreneurship journey, but it's social enterprises themselves when they're starting to think about how they're best answering a problem. And then interestingly, for the rest of the private sector, a lot of them are still considering the role that they play in impact creation, purpose-led business, corporate responsibility, whatever you call it, best practice around how they then can plug into the sector. And we've got interesting piece of work we do around supply chains and bringing social enterprises into large-scale corporations through procurement, which in itself, social procurement is quite a under-researched area. We're working with Cranfield Business School to look into that. And it's thinking about the role that businesses as a whole can play, but not just from a donations perspective, but core business activity like procurement. And then there's others as well, and how they could be feeding into sectors that then answer some of the biggest challenges that the UK faces. That was just question one, though. I think you had a second question as well, Arnie, if you want me to still answer.
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind. It was about customers. So yeah, there's a range of organisation types which will come from sort of content we'll share from Social Enterprise UK, which, you know, community interest companies trade normally, but then, you know, have to put profits back in, or mutuals and co-ops have a more sort of democratic focus in their nature. But then outside of that kind of planning of which specific organisation type you think is appropriate, the planning of who's then going to pay for this work, what are the typical sort of customers you see for social enterprises? Is it individuals that come into a cafe or shop that's run by a social enterprise, or what are the bigger organizational customers across industry and public services?
It's every customer you could possibly think of, which is a super broad answer to your question. There's potential to sell to every type of person in the world. You could be creating, you've broadly got B2B, B2C. You might also want to think about like selling to the public sector as well as a third distinct kind of customer group. So if you're looking at all three of those, social enterprises can exist. Products and services then are the two other broad kind of types of things that you could be trading. A particular product that you've brought out as a result of an intervention that you've researched, or it could be a service which is looking at consulting and advice. There's potential for everything. It really depends on what your area of expertise is. And also I'm quite conscious that the audience has got, it's a wide range of disciplines as well. So I don't think that there would be one customer type that you would focus on. It really depends on your subject. So if you're looking at geography research and sustainability, and you can be looking at the role of a big business and how they affect local environments, something specific like the soil qualities and like how they degrade over time. Like there's super specific topics that then big businesses could be interested in, depending on like if they're a construction business and the role that their work plays in a local area, and helping innovation in that way. Or you could be looking at products for consumers, depending on your research topic. So I think there's so many ways you can cut it that you couldn't pick one customer type.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really interesting information. And yeah, it's to illustrate, you know, with social ventures, you have a couple of opportunities through grants and funding and donations that maybe wouldn't be available to limited companies, but then to also really show that the full range of customers, from individuals up to commissioned work from industry bodies and governments, things like that, are also absolutely useful and appropriate for these types. Maybe sometimes people think it's, you know, oh, it's charities, you can only live off donations and grants and things like that. But with these social ventures, it's, you know, a very dynamic form that allows customers of all types, as well as those more sort of charitable inputs to it. But again, thank you so much for that introduction. That's, you know, really important knowledge about the sector generally, and how useful it is to get engaged in this. Nicola will be around for sort of more general Q&A in a few minutes, so please do pop your questions in the chat for all the speakers, and we'll go through a few of them after everyone's spoken. But if I can thank you again, Nicola, and move on to Marina Pritchard at ALIA to give a presentation about sort of development case studies and what goes on in getting an organisation off the ground.
Thank you, Arnie. Hi, everybody. As Arnie mentioned, I'm Marina. I'm Programme Manager at ALIA. What I'm going to go through today is just to tell you a bit more about what ALIA is, what we're all about, what our mission is, and also how we support social enterprises and impact organisations. And at the end, I'll also be sharing some of the case studies and examples of social enterprises that have been through our programmes or through our support and our coaching, just to give you an idea sort of how that all developed. So ALIA, we are a social enterprise ourselves. We were founded over 20 years ago, and actually our mission is to support individuals or teams that are either starting or growing their impact businesses. And what do we mean by impact? For us, it's people that are working on organisations that benefit and making a positive impact on people, planet, and place, and that are tackling the biggest global challenges. So can include social enterprise, we work with charities, we work for good businesses. So our core cohorts typically are quite varied, as well as local business. So the three main pillars of support that we offer here at ALIA are access to spaces. So we have future business centres across Cambridge, Peterborough. We've got workspaces in London where we can provide co-working spaces, meeting rooms, events. We run socials, and just a place where to help like-minded people build a community around them and build also that peer-to-peer support network. On the second pillar is more around offering financial services, so building up the responsible impact market. And then thirdly is running free business support programs. So that's really where I come in. So this is the team that works with me on the program side. So the development of the programs, doing the coaching and the mentoring, as well as helping build up that community within ALIA. And the team background is very varied. So we've been business owners, we've done sales, marketing, community building, experience in finance. And as for myself, so I was actually a humanities student, so I studied modern languages at university and then went on to work for 5 years in an AI-powered venture capital firm in London, so working alongside many founders across Europe, and then became an advisor in an age tech social enterprise in London, and then moved to ALIA as a programme manager just to pursue my passion in social good and social impact. So just to share some of the numbers and some of the impact that we measure. From the three pillars that I mentioned, this is some of the support has resulted in. I won't go into each one, but just to give a bit of an overview. And yes, as I mentioned, so we've got future business centres, we've got 2 in Cambridge, we've got 1 in Peterborough, and then we've got the workspace within the Queen Mary Enterprise Zone in London. And so I just wanted to share a bit of a snippet of the free support programs that we do run. So there's quite a variety. We try to meet each stage in the social entrepreneurship journey. So the earliest stage is at the hackathon stage, so where we bring the public together in a collaborative in-person space to solve problems, share ideas and their skills. The second one is a step after that, which is to start your business program for individuals or groups that have an idea maybe for a social enterprise or an impact organization, and just need to go through the foundational understanding of running a commercially and sustainable business. Then there's the Grow Your Business program. So it's for already established social enterprises or impact organizations within the areas that we work. And yes, so just trying to help them. Maybe they've reached a wall when it comes to their growth, or they need the motivation. So we just help them to break down those walls and get them motivated to take the next step in their growth. We also run impact accelerators, so those are slightly longer programs that last 6 months, with the end goal of pitching in front of a panel of investors. So the 6 months is really a place where to develop their pitching skills. So we go about developing a pitch and just getting connected to the right people within the ecosystem. And then there's the accelerator challenges that we run. So we partner up with a variety of corporates, venture capital firms, and we run programs alongside them. And I'll give a few examples of that later on as well in the case study. So just to briefly go over what kind of things we do inside the program. So when somebody applies, we offer one-to-one coaching. As I mentioned, we try to build up a peer-to-peer support network. So we run activities to help really build up the value that's within the room, and getting people sharing their skills, because we really see the value of building an environment where you're with like-minded people who are maybe in similar situations, but have their experiences to share. We also match them with mentors. So at the end of the program, we have a mentor network. So we match them with the people that we feel might be able to support them in the best way that we can. And we also provide a resources bank. So it's a place where we add all of our workshop notes and all of our video recordings, so that it's more flexible. They can go back to the content in their own time and can work more around schedules. And as I said, we have co-working days, so we open up the spaces that we have. We're very lucky to have these spaces, just as a place to help people connect. And then after they finish a program, they join our alumni, so that they continue being part of an ecosystem in the community. So yeah, so now that I sort of did a run through about ALIA, what we do and what our programs entail, I wanted to go through a few case studies, just to give you a sense about what kind of different social enterprises or impact organisations we've worked with in the past. So the first example was actually from one of the hackathons that we ran in the summer. So over a couple of days, we had the public coming together in the Guildhall in Cambridge to work on some of the issues identified by the Cambridge City Council. So we came together to sort of bring ideas, share skills, and then out of that, from groups, we identified one specific issue, and then we sort of came together to build a solution, and it ended with a pitch. So an example of an idea that came about was a platform that connects adolescents in Cambridgeshire with art skills and opportunities. Another good example that I wanted to share was actually a venture that sort of went through a bit of a journey with us. So the two founders here, Alexander and Sarah, were both working corporate jobs, and they needed something. They wanted to go and follow sort of their passion, and also wanted to find an opportunity to build something that was more flexible and worked around their other commitments. So they started off on our Start Your Business program, where they sort of identified their mission and vision, and where they were able to lay the foundations for building a sustainable and commercially viable social impact business. So just to give you maybe some idea on the content and some of the things that we cover in the Start Your Business program is business model canvas. We do marketing sessions, sales, finance, legals, and registration. And so after that, after actually 1 year, they then joined our Impact Accelerator. Went through that journey and ended with a demo day in front of a panel of investors. And actually now one of the founders has become a speaker for our programs. So I think that was a nice example to share. Another example, because we do work with local businesses as well that have maybe an impact vision. So one example of that is Orleans Kitchen. They're actually one of our tenants and run the cafe in the Guildhall, and they were also part of our Start Your Business program, just to help them develop their sort of idea and with their community kitchen, and build up on their sales and their marketing and their finance. And then I wanted to share an example of a social enterprise that went through our Grow Your Business program. So Little Miracles is a social enterprise that supports families who have children with additional needs, disabilities, and life-limiting conditions. And the founder, Michelle, joined the Grow Your Business program because she often felt a gap between not being commercial enough to be seen as a business, but at the same time too business focused to be seen as a charity, or to be seen in the charity world. So in her words, as a social enterprise, the challenges that we face are often very different to your typical business, and trading can be seen as a dirty word in the non-profit sector. There is always the extra challenge of not only delivering our charitable aims, but we are also ensuring we have an organisation which is commercially viable and sustainable for the long term, whilst balancing numerous stakeholders. So yeah, that was just a bit of a snippet of what she told us after finishing the programme with us. And then another example is Sean. So he has been working on an impact organisation called Mind Data. I actually came across Sean a year ago through LinkedIn. I reached out to him to tell him about our programme. He had just started out. He had an idea which had developed during his time at university. He wanted to work on mental health, particularly for students. And so I sort of showed him to the Impact Accelerator, and later he joined one of our Accelerator challenges. And so a year on, he's got an investment, he's gotten awards, and he's managed to grow his team. So it's just great to see over a short space of time how much this has developed. So right now he's focusing on student mental health and making therapy more accessible in universities, and helping therapists manage their clients as well. And last but not least is Paige. So they were part, again, of one of our Accelerator challenges with Diff Capital Partners. So Paige was actually founded by a group of Imperial College London students, and then they had an idea, and they came to the Accelerator Challenge because they needed some mentoring. So the Diff Capital Partners team came together with them, spent 3 months offering them mentoring, and then it sort of ended with a pitch and a prize giving, and they actually came first. So yeah, this is sort of a overview, and as you can see in conclusion, the case studies show how social entrepreneurs we have worked with have come from very different experiences and backgrounds, from universities, from corporates, from failed startups. And really, if someone has a dream or mission to do good and build something that positively impacts people, planet, and place, there is support available out there. So yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you so much, Marina. Some really great examples there, and the reality of getting going and developing is a really, really important one. I don't mind if I just ask a couple quick questions, if that's okay. One would be, what does it sort of look like day to day if you're taking part in one of these programs? Is it 3 months of full-time sitting in a classroom sort of thing? And then the second question is, what's the sort of biggest challenge you tend to find people asking you about when they're being supported through these programs?
Yeah, so in terms of the format for the program itself, there's workshops every week. So we have a set time every week, depending on which program they decided to attend. So you can either join online or you can come in person to one of our centres. We're actually working on that, and actually it's good to be in this conversation to get some feedback, because we're just trying to develop self-paced learning just to offer options which are more flexible and can work around schedules. So that's sort of in the pipeline at the moment, and hopefully we'll have something available from January with the self-paced learning route. But yeah, at the moment it's weekly workshops that last a couple of hours, and then on top of that they can come to our co-working, or they attend the coaching session. And then your second question around biggest challenges, I'd say actually it's around building community. So I feel like just having a place where you can go, where you feel it's a safe space where you can share your experiences, where your opinions are valued, and just you can share your passions with a room of people who really care. So I think that's sort of the challenge that I've seen, is just finding the right place where to sort of have that. And then just having something quite structured, and just a place where you have that foundational understanding of business and the key components of building a sustainable, commercially viable business as well. So yeah, I'd say that those are the main two.
Great, thank you so much. Really interesting again. And yeah, it's worth bearing in mind that that's sort of an aim of this community of practice, is to make sure that people are able to find that support in different ways, and work together to sort of repeat projects. Oh, someone's come off mute. Oh, it is Jeremy. Great. Jeremy's edging to get going. He's going into the chat. So thanks very much, Marina. We'll move on to Jeremy. And as I said, there's space for a few questions at the end. So any questions for any of the speakers, please pop in. We'll work through in a minute. But if we can move over to Jeremy then, at Triodos Bank, and we'll hear about what larger scale development looks like and what success looks like once organisations up and running.
Just too keen, Arnie. Sorry about that. So thanks also to Marina and Nicola. Really interesting sessions. And I think it's really inspiring to be part of an hour like this, and really, really motivating to see universities thinking in this way. So a bit of a disclaimer before we get going. And I think Arnie's purposely structured this session in this way. Obviously, that Nicola session was about what's a social enterprise and thinking about that as even as an option. Marina really around that earlier stage social entrepreneurship journey. And I guess we come in slightly later and saying, once that organization is up and running, what are its funding opportunities to grow it further, to create and scale more impact? So a bit about Triodos. We've been around for a while, certainly in the UK for about 40 odd years. And we exist as an organisation to fund organisations that have societal and planetary benefit. What does that mean? It sounds grandiose. Well, it means that we work with organisations that maybe work with some of the most vulnerable people in the community. So whether that's people with learning difficulties, people coming out of prison and looking to not reoffend, or young people not in employment, education or training, right through to trying to deal with some of our intractable climate and sustainability challenges. So maybe whether that's around the transition to net zero, whether it's around renewable energy, whether it's around rewilding, we try and look at organisations that cover those themes, and then equally right through to sort of organisations in the arts and culture space, in organics, in regenerative farming. So quite a broad remit. And most of the activity that the bank does is more conventional secured lending. So much like when you take out a mortgage on your property and the bank takes a charge over that, your home, most of the stuff that the bank does is lending to organisations that fit our mission requirements and have values alignment, but where there's a charge over the asset. And that's not really the focus of my session today, because I think that's for organisations that are certainly further down that operational and trading journey. My session today is really just to introduce you to my team, which is the corporate finance team, and we're a little bit different. We're quite unusual. So first and foremost, we're an advisory team. So we're not sitting on a pot of money that we're lending or investing into organisations that fit the Triodos values. We're working with, potentially slightly earlier stage organisations to help them develop a business plan, to help them understand their financial forecasts, to help them understand what's the right sort of capital to raise to help them grow, and then to help them ultimately go out and raise that capital. So we're sort of that advisory function, but then ultimately we're there to go out and do just that, which is to raise the funding. And we tend to do that in a number of ways. We'll go and work out with institutional funders who have a real social or environmental remit. They exist to create good, not just commercial return. Or we'll go out to our investment crowdfunding platform. And that's what kind of makes us a bit unusual in a way. We've got a platform of 6,500 investors that want to invest directly into organizations that resonate with them on an impact level, whether that's circular economy, renewable energy, national charities, or early stage SMEs looking to create good through the work that they do. We are giving those individual investors a chance to invest directly into those organizations. So I guess the first thing to say is we're legal form agnostic. So, to cover off the point Arnie says, yes, we do work with charities, but equally we work with some slightly more unusual legal forms that haven't been covered here today, whether that's a community interest company or a community benefit society. But absolutely, we work with limited companies. And I don't think that should be seen in any way as a dirty word. Triodos exists to support sustainability, and part of the essence of sustainability is being financially sustainable. That's the bedrock by which you can create good. You need to, be financially robust in your own right. So we work with limited companies, and that shouldn't be seen as a negative. An example at the moment, we're working with a business called Fish Tech, which is a marine technology business founded by two academics. One came out of university with an engineering degree, one came out with an undergrad course from Oxford and did an MA in fisheries science. And the focus of their business is partly providing consultancy to NGOs, to commercial fisheries, to governments, but fundamentally it's a tech business. So it sells products that are designed to reduce the number of dolphins, porpoises, turtles, seabirds that are incidentally, unintentionally caught up in destructive fishing practices. So that's an example of a business that for us is for profit. It exists to grow. We're looking at social venture funds. We're looking at external institutional funds that want to invest in limited companies and take some equity, but where the motivations of the business are really around environmental benefit. And when there's a number of examples like that we've supported this year alone. A female founder-led business producing organic compostable nappies, for example. So absolutely a limited company, a social enterprise is a core part of the funding that we do, but equally we'll work with non-limited company structures like a community interest company, for example. And we had a really interesting example last year of a company that came to us, and it was a veterinary practice. And on the face of it, we had to really scratch our head and say, does this, it's a great social enterprise, does it fit our values? There's a lot of negative press around pet ownership and the biodiversity impact of dog ownership in particular. Is this something we want to get involved in? And what really motivated us to support them, partly that B Corp, partly that badge of accreditation around their values. Something they really interestingly did, which kind of goes against the grain of what I've just said, is that they chose to transition their business from private ownership into a community interest company, which effectively ensured that some of the benefit of the profits they were generating were going back into the community. But we also looked at quite a lot of some of the other things that they were doing around their supply chains and the way that they treated co-workers, and the fact that they were existing to provide affordable pet healthcare in deprived communities where actually the cost of conventional pet care was just too high. People therefore weren't looking after their animals. So always a question mark. And I guess the purpose of this session really is for you to project that lens 5 years, 4 years, 3 years down the line and said, once this social enterprise is up and running, what does Triodos look for from an impact or a commercial perspective to provide that growth funding or to help raise it? And I think from an impact point of view, that's a really hard question to answer, actually, because there isn't a user guide, there isn't a manual, there isn't a KPI metric that says, an organisation has to look like this, it's quite a subjective decision ultimately. Sometimes the legal form is a key, is a cue, is an indication. For example, in the business I've just given, if you've voluntarily transitioned your business from private ownership into community infrastructure, it tells you a little bit about your motivations. But equally, as I said, a limited company absolutely might be something we support, but there we'll look quite closely at, are they really trying to address an intractable social problem? Are they trying to really transition our planet forward in terms of carbon reduction, for example? So we'll get under the skin of it and try and understand the DNA, the fabric, and the raison d'etre for that organization. And in terms of what does the business have to look like commercially, as I sort of disclaimed at the start, sadly, we're not right at that front end. So what we're not is quite in a position yet where we are funding organizations, or not even organizations, ideas coming out of universities or prototypes or pre-revenue businesses just yet. There is funding out there. We've seen some, as I said, there's lots of social ventures out there providing funding for early stage businesses that might be tech focused and addressing an intractable social challenge. But equally, we've seen some really interesting stuff around local authorities and charitable trusts looking at these organizations and saying they're actually trying to address something quite pioneering here, and we're quite willing to take maybe a higher risk than we would ordinarily do to seed the funding for that organization. But we come in a bit later. So for example, Fish Tech, the environmental business I just gave you an example of, when we first did an equity raise for them 2 years ago, they were about £300,000 of revenue, not quite profitable, but clearly on a pathway to profitability, clearly trying to address a really challenging sustainability issue, and had some really nice commercial features. They had patents and protections around their products that they developed. Their business model was underpinned by some regulatory and legislative tailwinds, i.e. some governments were mandating the use of some of their technology to protect marine life. So actually that gave them quite a robust revenue stream. So those are sort of some of the ingredients that got us comfortable. But then equally, sometimes organizations don't want to raise equity, or by virtue of their structure, a charity or a company limited by guarantee, they might not just be able to issue shares. So they might be looking at, say, raising debt. And when we're supporting organizations to effectively raise a loan, where we're raising it from our community of investors who want to lend to that social enterprise, then the ingredients we look for are slightly different. We'll look for a business that's been trading a while, that can demonstrate that they can service the interest on a loan and repay the loan back over time. So probably slightly more operationally mature. And I would say typically those businesses might be 4 or 5 years into their social enterprise trading journey before they're quite ready to come and talk to us. But what I would say, and the reason we do events like this and we go and speak to incubators and accelerator funds and universities, is because you want to demonstrate that those businesses who are right at the seed of their idea cannot go on to become businesses that can raise growth funding. And that there are organizations like us that are out there to not only raise the funding, but to ensure that at the heart of that, it's absolutely impact first. And the commercial questions almost come second in a way. We want to make sure that that impact argument is absolutely front and center.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Really interesting insight into the stages of success and what's there. If I could just ask a brief question. I know you've talked about how you define this a little bit, but what are the, I guess, first rough sort of standards, I guess, that help you to communicate success outside of commercial return? Saying that social impact's there, how obviously there's not a one size fits all rule for this, but yeah, what are the...
Yeah, I think actually it is really subjective, and I don't think there is a set answer to this. I think it depends partly on who we're raising investment from. So if we're going out and raising it from an institutional audience who has a very specific remit, say around financial inclusion or social inclusion or environment, they may be very keen to ensure that that investment will yield certain results over time relative to their remit. But when we're raising it, say, from our investment crowdfunding piece, actually that's not necessary. What they really just want to understand is this business a force for good. They don't really mind that in 2 or 3 years time you're going to produce a set of KPIs that demonstrate X, Y, and Z. They just want to understand the motivations of the business. Sometimes, as I said, it's apparent from the legal form the business takes. But for a limited company where that's more challenging, I don't think they're particularly going to be holding that business to certain KPIs. We try to present them. So, for example, if we are working with we worked with a business who was looking to build homes, and those homes were being built by people coming out of prison, giving them an opportunity to enter employment and training, with the idea that that would reduce the level of reoffending and going back into prison. And there we did present some output KPIs to the investors. We said we expect the level of reoffending to fall from X relative to the national average. We expect the number of affordable homes to be built to be Y, and we expect Z number of individuals through our programs to come out with a GMBQ or a GCSE or an A level. But I suppose the critical point is the investment return isn't hard set against that. If those aren't achieved, that's not a failure in a way. It just shows a direction of travel.
Excellent, thanks so much. There's a conversation we'll have in the community as we move forward, have a very practical sort of co-design of what that assessment looks like, and how to advocate for that recognition of success outside of pure commercial return. Is not one that's answered, but a mix of the nuts and bolts within institutions, and then exactly that difference it's made out in the world and its ability to prove that it's sustainable. How do we get senior management in the sector to really recognise that is really helped and prompted by this session. So thanks very much. I guess one more just quick question though, Jeremy, is the sort of sources of funding. There's a few dedicated funds you mentioned there that are maybe focused around a theme. One area I've had conversations with, and maybe, up and positives and negatives in those conversations, is with economic social good funds and mission funds and things like that. We've had a few what sort of represents more conventional VC investments, and we'll be saying that they exist to support more social impact focused projects. But then if that project doesn't quite meet the financial return, and that focus on social impact and sustainability maybe isn't quite as robust as there. Do you find that similarly? And then, what's the sort of mentor network? Are they finance people, or are they people that have developed social ventures and now want to sort of help other projects to get going?
Yeah, in terms of the question around the investor universe, there is an ecosystem of what we would call social investors or impact investors, and can be quite different. So they can be quite commercially minded investors first and foremost, with a social bias, for example, or they can actually be more towards the charitable trust and foundation end, where actually they really do exist to create pioneering impact and change and catalytic transformation, and where actually they're willing to take quite high commercial risk. If it doesn't work, at least they've tried to pioneer something. And that there's a whole sweep in between investors. And I guess our role, when we're going beyond just our investment crowdfunding to go to speak to those institutions, is to work out who is best placed. Yes, there are lots of social venture funds, environmental venture funds, who are looking at the most pioneering up and coming impact brands. But when you strip it back, they're still looking at quite private equity, VC, conventional things, i.e. Quite aggressive growth, patented business, maybe B2B rather than business to consumer because of the risks attached to maybe that perception of that customer base. So are quite commercial. And then when it gets to the challenges around valuation, all that sort of thing, maybe the impact discussion loses its focus. So I think it's important to always try and find the right investor for the right project. And it can be quite varied. Some of them absolutely genuinely do stuff where they know the prospect of getting their investment returned is much lower, but they're trying to really address a challenge. And we've seen that particularly in some of the issues around working with young people not in education, employment or training, or reoffending, where actually if we can improve the trajectory of someone's life by getting them into jobs and employment, but the risk to their investment is quite high, that's a risk worth taking.
Great, thanks so much. And again, that's a really important aim of this community of practice, defining what are those investors and mentors that generally work in this sector or support these kind of ventures, and what's the sort of breakdown of who they are, where to find them, stuff like that. That's, I think, going to be a very organic development, specifically for universities and this kind of development. So to have that.
I'll just say there is a website called Good Finance. It's quite helpful as a starting point, and it points you to a raft of investors in the space, not just investors, people that are willing to support business on their journey, but points you also to a raft of investors in the space, and you can get a sense of who's operating and the sort of work that they do.
Excellent, yeah. And I think there'll be dedicated activities around funding, especially that early stage process, how to map your customers and then try and get some support is really great. We will open up to all speakers now, so if anyone has a question, it's a chance to pop it in the chat or raise your hand and speak it directly. But there was one that came through the chat, and it's for Jeremy. It says, is there support requirements or guidance for existing working capital for the companies from your team? I'm not 100% sure what they mean from companies from your team. I suppose that's what the sort of...
Yeah, I can't see the questions. I think the question you said is there support for existing companies with their working capital? Is that the question?
Yeah, that seems to be the question.
I mean, yes, absolutely. We've made a lot of the capital that we raise can be project specific, i.e. developing a new community centre in Newark for people from vulnerable communities, but equally it can be very much focused on that working capital conundrum. We worked with an electric bike business last year, and the focus for them was absolutely that. They were seeing a big change in the lead-in time from their suppliers, and they needed some cash to help them through that COVID period. So it absolutely was working capital related, and most of our business, as I said at the very start, are existing businesses. So we're not seeding those complete startups. We're looking with existing businesses to support. So working capital is a common area for us to raise capital for.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll just give a few minutes for any more questions to come through the chat or pop your hand up. I've got a question for all the speakers if you want to take turns to answer this, and I guess it would be, what's the main thing you think people should be considering? Bear in mind, professionals are supporting academics. Either side of that, when you're starting to consider this as a route to commercialize your research and develop it, I guess at each stage of picking your organization type, planning first customers and deals, and then that larger scaling up sort of plans for the first couple of years. What are the sort of key things, considerations, best sort of practice things to keep in mind from your experience? Should we go back in order? Nicola, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm trying to grapple my head around, I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about how it really depends on your the academics and the discipline that they're working with. So I'm assuming that the research that they produce is evidence for an intervention that could happen, and then it really depends on what that intervention is. But I would say you need to think about what works best for the solution. I think this is what Jeremy was just covering as well. The funding you get depends on the type of business you're building. The customer that you're going to aim towards depends on the product or service that you're offering as well. So I would say it's probably referencing back to what I said earlier, having a deep understanding of a challenge and how an intervention could resolve that challenge is more important than thinking about the customer yet and the model that you're going to use or the legal form or the funding route you're going to have. Because until you know what that challenge is at a deep level and what the solution could be, it's about trialing that first. There's things like you could use things like the lean startup principles, which has been very much successful in the tech industry, but it's about taking an idea And instead of spending a lot of time thinking about the future of the business and how it's going to run in detail and who your customers are and going really deep down into forming the business as a traditional business plan, it's actually it's counterproductive, because you're building a lot of the stuff that's key for a business in the long term, but ultimately you might not be building something that people need. So finding out if it's something that people need or organizations need first, and that's taking an idea and forming it in a super lean way. And I really would recommend reading The Lean Startup. So prototyping or piloting and finding feedback from prospective customers, a wide range of potential customers, and that's going to help you hone in on who your customer base will be, what model then you should be adopting as a business that will then benefit your longer term growth strategy. So for example, Jeremy's referenced like community interest companies versus limited companies. It really depends on the product and the customer that you're working with, but you don't know any of those things until you know that the idea actually is going to have traction. And a big key part of that is starting small, but also looking to have uncomfortable conversations. So you need to be getting people to tell you what they really think of the idea and not just agreeing with you that that is a good idea, because a lot of people look for that echo chamber of like, this is really good, isn't it? But actually you need to go to people that are difficult and get them to give the feedback, and then immediately your answer, you should be trying to disprove your answer straight away. So I wouldn't even consider customers, models, investment routes until you know that the intervention that you have holds water to any person or any organization first.
Excellent. That's a really important point in our roles as TTOs and KE professionals supporting academics to be that critical friend, as well as what is also at the same time needing to engage people and make sure that this seems like a viable and worthwhile option and isn't just about making money. It's about really creating that impact and research, but then saying, how sort of realistically is it actually going to work, and what that sort of checklist to make sure that it's a viable venture is, again, something we're going to try and co-design as a community and then sort of have formalized in what doing these jobs is. So that's a really important point. Thanks. Marina, you ready for a quick answer there?
Yeah, sure. I think I would second a lot of the things that Nicola was saying about talking to people who are actually going to give you some constructive feedback into your idea and concept. I also would second the Lean Startup book, and we use that in our training courses as well as a model. I'd say the business model canvas is good as well, just as a way you can download it online, just as a way of sort of plotting down the 9 key components of building a business, and just seeing sort of how putting everything, that all your thoughts onto paper really helps. And so we cover that in our trainings as well, and that we've gotten a really positive feedback with that sort of framework. But yeah, really talking to as many people as possible that maybe have existing social enterprises that can share their experiences and their journeys and tell you what they wish they had done differently, and kind of doing a thorough, competitive analysis to see, are they existing, social enterprises working on something similar? Can I tap into their networks? Can I connect with them? Are there some events that I can go to, demo days, just to get examples of existing social enterprises and pitches and everything? So yeah, I'd say in a nutshell, that's the main things.
Excellent, thank you. And Christopher's just shouted out the problem statement canvas, which is a good starting point. Absolutely is. It's a really useful way to work through what your venture looks like as it moves forward. And yeah, the sort of network of support and mentorship is really important, which is where, these new relationships with organizations such as yourselves and across the social enterprise sector are going to be really, really important, because we don't need to start this from scratch and create a whole version for our sector individually. We can have people accessing what is fantastic support and knowledge, and sort of collegiate support in different ways, but defining how that relationship looks and the sort of contours of it regionally and across different themes is what, as a community, I think we should be shouting about, so we know what's absolutely right for us as professionals and what needs to be shouted for is great. But that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Marina. Jeremy, any sort of last thoughts then on general advice getting started?
I think, to be honest, it's just having, for me, a really clear and authentic mission statement and set of values. So understanding exactly why your business will exist once it's established beyond just a concept, and where you want it to be. And I think then the rest of it will follow very organically from that. So rather than starting at, right, should I invest? Should I structure this as a limited company, a kick? Well, actually, that will flow quite naturally from understanding why you're setting this business up. And there's no shame in saying it's for profit, or it's for community benefit, or it's for charitable purposes, whatever that legal form is. That comes later, once you've said, actually, this business is. So that comes down to the founder having a very real sense of their own values, I think.
Great, excellent. Thanks so much. Some really great prompts there and a good introduction to the social enterprise sector. So that's the bit with sort of speakers over. So thanks again, everybody. That's really great contribution, and it's, you know, sort of social enterprise 101 session a little bit. We'll carry on and have more dedicated sessions around maybe building specific organizations or how different organizations have measured success and celebrated that in the future. But this is a great introduction to say that the sector itself exists, there's support out there, and there's some really, really great knowledge that we can link to without having to start fresh, as more and more academics hopefully pick these routes as a way to feel comfortable and happy developing their research outside of research projects themselves. So yeah, if there was any final thoughts from the speakers before we move on to a bit more of sort of community structure. Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was just going to say, there's one question that I've noticed around healthcare focused social enterprises and medtech, and I would say that there are a number of health tech focused funds out there that I've really looked at in the last 6 months, and interesting to see the likes of Macmillan creating their own venture arm to focus specifically on early stage tech developments to try and address some emerging themes around cancer prevention, for example. So absolutely, there's social enterprises operating in that sector, and there's founders operating in that sector, and there's venture arms of national charities operating in that sector.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I have a background in health and social care, community interest company, but I helped to build a few years ago. And that was exactly how we funded ourselves. I won tenders and commissions from local authorities, but then a lot of the sort of charitable organizations within that sector would then fund us to pilot things or run our activities for specific audiences. And that funded, obviously, my salary, other people's salaries, and the growth of the organization. So what then became a regular contributor to government policy. So that's a really important one. Yeah, the industry bodies and the charities within any sectoral theme you're looking at are really important funder opportunities. Great then, thanks again. As I said, more dedicated sort of branch out and things like that will come for sort of granular aspects of it, but as this is the first session, I thought it was nice introduction to what social ventures look like generally and the sector. We will now move on to more sort of community governance kind of things. As I said, in the future, these will be really, really practical, interactive co-design sessions for policy that we can then advocate for, or training that we can then create, or professional development that we can then get formalized across the sector.